Well, today I want to talk about some of the commonly held myths about handwriting, um, and particularly this problem about prediction from the lines of the hand. It's a kind of really commonly held assumption that handwriting is all about prediction, and it is interesting to consider where those ideas come from and what their basis is, and whether or not they actually have any bearing in actuality or not. And the simple answer to that question is no, they have no bearing in actuality. And where do they come from? They come from 15th century chiromantic views about the hand. So it's a kind of really commonly held assumption that the lines somehow show a fixed fate or fixed destiny. And that was certainly the view in the 15th century when palmistry was beginning. In the European traditions, in the chiromantical texts we have from that time, we can quite clearly see their preoccupation with with prediction, working out what one's fate and fortune were. And this is to be expected in the context of a society where there was very limited opportunity for doing anything other than what the society prescribed for you. Feudalism was not a socially mobile society. You were born a serf, you died a serf. If you were born into a noble family, you died in a noble family. Perhaps the only opportunity anybody had for advancement within that society or change was to join the religious order and become a monk. And it's interesting also, therefore, one of the things we do find in those texts is lots of signs and indication that someone was going to get an ecclesiastical promotion or become a bishop, or they would do a lot of worship in their lives. So the common themes are worship, death, and wives and children. And in a society where life was indeed nasty, brutal, and short, again, these concerns are unsurprising. So, for example, we know from sociological evidence that basically people live probably about 30 to 40 years most of the time. Certainly, being 15 years old was considered to be middle-aged. We have that in written texts. Even in the text in the time of Shakespeare, Juliet, when she's at the opening scene of Romeo and Juliet, she is she's just turned into her 14th birthday, and the opening scene is her father going to her room and saying, "Right, you're 14 now. Now we have to get you married." And obviously, the marriage at that time was really important for women. They had no position in society other than being well married. And obviously, the economic value of a woman in those days was simply her ability to reproduce and have children. So, therefore, the concern in the hands is whether or not you're going to get married, and the concern is whether or not you're going to produce any babies. And that emphasis on the interpretation of the hand is entirely a product of the sociology, politics, and economics of medieval Europe. And that is what they were looking for, so that's what they saw in the hand. I'm going to show you a manuscript that I've got from that time, which will illustrate this for you entirely. This is a text from the 15th century called the manuscript called Digby 88. There are quite a number of extant manuscripts from that time, but this is fairly typical of the sort of genre. So, for example, if you look on the palm, you can see that the lines have been drawn in a kind of very rough and ready way, and you can see that there are various markings that have been put on the hand. So you've got lines, crosses, little horizontal lines here. And then the interpretation, the significance of those line formations is written on the fingers themselves. So, for example, on the index finger, you can see the sign of the cross here, and it basically says the sign of the cross to be found on this area of the hand is going to indicate that you're going to become a bishop, whereas the little marks on the side of the hand there show you're going to die of wounds to the head. So, one positive and one negative to be found on the mount area underneath the index finger. The line here between the ring and the index, ring and the middle fingers show that you're just going to die of a sudden death. The line underneath the ring finger indicates that you're going to end up with lots of worldly goods. And the line that ends between the index finger and the middle finger, which is what we know as the water line or the heart line, which wasn't considered anything to do with the heart in those days. It was called the linea mensalis, which is to do with the mensal line. And basically, that was an indication of your likelihood of dying in childbirth if you're a woman, or dying of the bloody flux, which is a kind of form of medieval dysentery. So to have a waterline ending between the two fingers was not a good thing at all. So, yeah, and not actually that common. Actually, that line only occurs about 6 or 7% of people's hands ending in that particular formation. So it's not particularly common, but nonetheless significant to the medieval mind. And then the lines that of interest in this particular hand regarding sort of children and things are indicated here. Again, the horizontal lines are the signs of wounds to the head, and the little curvy lines there are signs that of the number of wives that a man's going to have. And clearly this is a man's hand. It's the right hand. The left hand is to be read for the hands of women, the right hand for the hands of men. And in this same area, in the corresponding left hand handprint, then drawing, there will be marks for the number of children that you're going to have. So this is where this sort of stuff comes from. And so this idea that the idea that the lines of the hand will show you things like your fate and your fortune, or the number of wives and children, comes from the 15th century. So you could basically argue that anyone who has a view of that's what the hand's about has got a view of the hand that's literally 500 years out of date. And modern hand readers, and there are many of us who've done this, have looked at these line formations and said, well, I never got married, or I don't have children, or I've got 2 children, not 6, or I've got 4 children, not 2, whatever. The evidential inquiry into these kind of hand features conclusively demonstrate that there's absolutely no correlation between these little line formations underneath the little finger and marriages and children whatsoever. Just doesn't correlate at all. And a good response to that in any case, when women ask me about a childbirth, they say, how many children am I going to have? I basically say, well, how many children do you want to have? Essentially, reproduction is your right to determine yourself. That is the privilege of modern women with contraception. And that was a privilege that was not available to women in the 15th century. So yeah, the idea that you can actually predict that kind of thing from a hand, or that you would want to say that kind of information from a hand to somebody, even if you could see it, I think is incredibly unhelpful, because at the very least, what it does is it kind of aggrandizes the hand reader, and it diminishes the responsibility of the person whose hands you're reading. You're encouraging them to take a fatalistic view of their life, and obviously that's not a constructive or positive thing to be doing at all. So far be it from us to continue doing that. Here are some other handprints and manuscripts from that time. I actually want to show you something else, so maybe I'll just close that and go back to look at the next thing that I want to show you. So the kind of the question really is, why or how can we possibly do prediction from the hand? Well, the answer to that question is we can't. And when you know what I'm about to show you now, you'll see that actually it is not possible to do prediction from the lines of the hand. Again, once the assumption is understood that the prediction is predicated upon the idea that the lines of the hands don't change. But that is palpably not true. Here's an example of a pair of handprints of someone I've known pretty much all my life. The handprint on, he's left-handed, and the handprint on the left was taken in about 1984. The handprint on the right was taken in 2019. So these are handprints of the same guy taken 35 years apart. And if you look at these hands, you can actually see quite clearly there's quite a lot of subtle line changes that indicate changes in the personality. And I'm not going to go into that because that's a bit more complicated and that's a different kind of study and a different kind of story. But what I want to talk about is how palmists tend to try to make prediction from the detail of the lines of the hand. So if you look at the detail of the lines of a hand, for example, you can see the markings here, like you've got the islands in the line here at the beginning of the waterline. You've got little falling lines coming off here. You've got the way that the line ends and it droops down here. You can perhaps see this huge island here in the middle of the headline or the hairline. And you can see markings like dots and striations on the major earth line, so it's a bit fuzzy all around there. So yeah, there's lots of different line formations and the different markings, and according to the kind of predictive palmistry approach to the lines of the hand, all these little markings, all these bar lines, all indicate events or incidents or activities or explosions or conflicts or contradictions or stresses that have occurred in that person's life at that particular time. Similarly for the island, similarly for the break that you can see here, or the overlap, similarly for all the falling lines. And so the approach that they take is to look at the detail of the line, look at all these little detailed markings of the line, and pronounce that these all have meaning and significance in all these little detailed formations. However, to make a prediction about this person when he was 22, about, let's say, what was going to happen to him in his 40s, kind of assumes that the lines of the hands are not going to change. However, when you look at the hand some 35 years later, you can see quite clearly that the lines have changed. So, for example, look at the waterline. They're not the same kind of breaks and disruptions in that line. There's not even as many falling lines from that line there either. Look at the major airline. That island in the middle of the major airline has gone. Look at the major earth line. See how many cross lines there are going across the hand, across this line now in 2019. Not even half as many as there were in 1984. Let's just count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, arguably 11, arguably 12. And here we are in this hand here. 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5. So what happened? Does that mean those events didn't happen? Or does that mean he's forgotten these events? What does it mean? Well, what it means is the lines of the hands change, and whatever you say about a hand in 1984, you cannot make a prediction from, because you cannot know in advance if that line formation is even going to be there, if that marking is even going to be there in 5, 10, 15, 20, or 25 years. The very fact that the lines of the hands change over time is enough evidence for anyone to understand that it's impossible to do prediction from the lines of the hand, because you just don't know how they're going to change. And we don't know how they're going to change because they're not fixed. The lines do not show a fixed fate or a fixed destiny. What the lines show effectively is what's going on for you at this particular point in time. So it's like a snapshot of your consciousness in any one given moment. So what we can say from this handprint from 1984, there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of worry. By 2019, that stress, that anxiety, and that worry has evaporated. And for those of you who know about hand reading, you can probably work out a few things for yourself, and I'll just point them out to you without explaining their significance. But can you notice how there's all these upper minor water lines here, this part of the hand, that have just gone? You know, there's a lot of fragmented, look at this line here, it's right across here like that. It's just changed completely. This whole area of the hand has changed completely. So the signification of the upper minor water line has gone. the stress that's indicated by the duality in the major airline and in fact in the minor earth line at the same junction point has gone. The major airline, you can see in the left hand over here, suddenly veers right down very suddenly at this particular point here, and you can see the ending of the airline has changed dramatically, and the line doesn't descend right down into that part of the hand. So those of you who know about hand reading, you'll better work out what's actually happened for that. But there's undeniably an improvement in the quality of the hand over the time between these two handprints were taken. So things have got better for this guy in that time. So we're looking at what was going on psychologically, emotionally for this man when he was a young man in his early 20s, and as he is in this particular print, which is he's about 57 in that particular handprint. So it's, you know, there are life changes and changes in psychology that are reflected by the changes in the lines of the hand. But you can't do prediction from the lines of the hand. It's just not possible. And you know what that tells you now that you've seen this example, and I've got many more examples. If you look at the first video in this series on my channel here, I've done a complete study of these handprints. I've got about 20-25 examples in that video you can look at, and there's also an article on my website, and I'll post the link for that below, that basically shows explains the difference between these lines and what, you know, how the lines of the hands change over time. And once you understand that the lines change over time, then this whole notion that you can do prediction from the lines of the hand just goes right out the window. So that's not what the lines are for. That's not what the lines are about. And anyone who claims to be doing prediction from the hand is one of two things. Either they don't know anything about hands, like they don't know that the lines of the hands change, which is a pretty poor admission, really. If you've been studying hand reading and you don't know that the lines change, really, what have you been looking at? Or secondly, people do know that the lines of the hands change and haven't really thought it through about what that actually means. And I think a lot of that is down to the fact that most hand readers don't take prints. And clearly it's only possible to see how the hands change over time by taking handprints. That's the only way you can get any evidence to verify any claim that you may make about the significance of the lines. And here's a further thought that I'd like to sort of throw into the mix about this sort of idea that you can do predictive interpretation from the lines of the hand. You know, if you're going to do that, you need to be able to verify whether or not the predictions you made came true. So to do that, there's a couple of things that need to be done. First of all, you need to take handprints. So if you don't ever take handprints, you've got no way of proving anything. You've got to say, in 1984, I saw this line formation in this guy's hand, and it showed me that this was going to happen to him at this age and at this time and in this way. The second thing is you need to do a follow-up conversation with that person 20, 30, 40 years later, take their handprints again and actually interview them and ask them, well, in 1984, I said this was going to happen to you in 2004. Did that happen to you? I don't know of any palmist, any hand reader who's ever done that, ever. I mean, it's really difficult. It's really difficult to take the handprints of somebody 40 years later because you might not know them. You might not see them. You might have moved. I used to live in London. Now I live in New Zealand. You know, there's the chances of me contacting people whose hands I read in the 1980s is very small. The few handprints I have got are all family friends and people I've kept in contact, family members and so on, people who I've known all that time and still kept in touch with, but not clients. You know, the people that you see for hand reading, it's all usually a one-off experience. So again, you need to be really skeptical about anyone who makes these kind of claims because they've got no evidence to confirm that whether the interpretation they made at a particular time actually turned out to be correct. And unless they've got a rigorous methodology for evaluating that, there's no proof that what they're saying is anything other than just completely made up. Now, that's not to say that what they're coming up with isn't intuitive. It may well be that they got an incredibly good intuition, and if you want to know whether your palmist has good intuition or not, then you need to look at their hands, and there are certain features in the hands that clearly show a strong intuitive ability. But if they are getting it from intuition, then they're not getting it from the hand. So their claim that they have intuitive or psychic abilities, fantastic, that's really good. But you don't need a hand to use that. You don't need a hand to see things and make predictions of things. The person doesn't even need to be there. So what they're doing is, again, not reading the hand. And that's kind of what chirology is the study of. It's the study of the hand, what the hand can show us, irrespective of what our beliefs are about it, what our premonitions are about it, what our feelings are about it. There needs to be some kind of basis by which what we're noticing and what we're seeing in the hand can be corroborated, and by empirically, or can be corroborated in the experience of other people. And that requires a kind of rigorous approach to the hand, and a kind of a critical analytical take on what hand reading is about and how to approach hand reading. And that's more for a discussion on another day. So I'll leave some footnotes here, and I'll leave some links. I've just updated a page on my website. You can have a look at that as well, with the facts about the myths. But just have a think about that. You know, if the lines of the hands change, that means you can't do prediction from the lines of the hand. And that means that you now know something that all those fortune-telling prediction palmists don't know, and you won't be fooled again. All right, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you again soon.